Let's do it.
What's up, guys? Hope you're feeling alive right now. I'm Micah Keneally.
And I'm Josiah Keneally. Thanks for tuning in to the Young Adults Today podcast, where we talk about the faith of the next generation in our world today. And we are in for a treat. We're joined by Pastor Jim Gooden. How are you today?
Hey, great to be here. Thank you so much, guys. Yeah, excited. Doing great.
Well, we are thrilled to have you. And if you do not know Pastor Jim and his amazing family, before we do that, if you want to check out every Monday, right, Josiah? We have something new for the listener every Monday.
Our heart is to help you start your week off strong in your life, in your faith, in your leadership, and right where you're at. We believe that God's going to meet you and minister to you. And so new episodes drop every Monday. Thanks for subscribing and sharing this content with others. It helps us reach more listeners with the message of young adults today.
That's right. And Pastor Jim Gooden is joining us and the listeners today. He is a lead pastor of Real Life Church in Roseville, Minnesota. And he's just become a friend the last couple of months. And we just love his family and his wife and just been able to do a little bit of life with them. Real life, right? In the real church. And we just want to kick things off for maybe the listener who doesn't know you, Pastor Jim. Could you just give us a glimpse of like your journey of life and ministry and ultimately the story and how you got to where you are today?
I love it. Thanks so much, you guys, for having me on. We love you guys, and Beth and I, we feel the same way about you guys. Love that we're friends and love that we've had the opportunity to do some ministry together. I've been serving here at Real Life Church as lead pastor for 6 years now. My wife, Beth, we have two adult children. One's a college-age student down at St. Olaf College in Northfield, Logan, and our younger son, Jack. He's doing a gap year right now and figuring out life and direction and calling and all of those exciting things. One of the things that we love about our family story is we actually serve at the church that we grew up at. It's kind of a crazy story. My wife, Beth, has never attended another church as a regular attender. She's literally been a part of this church her entire life.
Wow.
Her dad pastored this church for 26 years. And then after he retired, Beth and I got married the first weekend in March. Her dad retired the last week in March. So a ton of life changes as young adults. And we were trying to figure out life. And I was a college student at the same time, just trying to figure out what do we do and where do we go? And, you know, at that age, I was 21, Beth was 20. Who are we? And who are we trying to become? And the pastors that actually tonight at our first Wednesday service, Pastor Pete and Diane Drake, they succeeded Beth's dad as pastor here. They took us under their wings. They mentored us. They shaped us and allowed us to serve. I've actually been on staff here at Real Life for 22 years. I jumped in right after graduating from college and was a creative arts worship pastor, creative arts pastor, young adults pastor, full-time here as executive pastor, and now I've been serving as lead pastor for 6 years now. We love it. We live in Brooklyn Center. We've always been a part of the Twin Cities. Roseville has kind of been the hub of our lives, and so born and raised in Minnesota, and we love it. So we love that we get to do what we do. It's a real privilege.
Seriously. And we were just with you guys not too long ago and talked about a life-giving church. We love your church. We love the people of your church. And I love even the emphasis that you've really modeled and paved a way for the next generation. And you're talking about on First Wednesdays at First Wednesdays and just on Sunday services about things like Generation Z and the faith of the next generation. And I'd love for people to hear some of the DNA of your church at Real Life and also some of your heartbeat as a pastor. And I think it happens to be a Wednesday. You have First Wednesday tonight. So I would imagine that is at the forefront of your mind, even doing a podcast like this. But can you talk about this First Wednesday service and really the heartbeat or the vision behind bringing everyone together for a time like this each month?
Yeah, it's so First Wednesdays, there's a number of churches that do First Wednesday services, and we always kind of saw that. It was always that's a great idea, having everybody in the room for a time for worship and prayer and altar ministry. And it was for us, it was always kind of it's an out there thing. Like, oh, wouldn't that be great? And we kind of left it. Last year, my wife and I, we were gifted a sabbatical. So we had a 4-month sabbatical from ministry,
Wow.
the entire summer, May through August. And so it was just a time of refreshing and, not being in day-to-day, ministry, preaching on Sundays. We were, exploring different churches, visiting friends. We love that we have so many pastor friends, but we never get to be a part of what they're doing in a church, because oftentimes when we would go visit, they're gone too. So that was a really great time. But we were away. We were gifted a week at a resort, like a super bougie resort down in Sanibel, Florida. We were down in Florida for a week. The week we happened to be having VBS here at church. And so we did all the right things with sabbatical. We took social media off our phone. We really disconnected. But for some reason, I either wanted to post a picture or I wanted to put an Instagram on my phone. And so 2 things happened. Number one, Beth and I were at dinner and we had a conversation about where did most of our deep spiritual development happen. And the conversation that we had was, it was much more than just the 1 hour that happens on a Sunday morning. Like, it was those pivotal relationships that we had. Like, we had one-on-one, or we've got a group of couples where there's 4 couples, and we've been friends for over 20 years. I mean, we've gone through loss of parents, and one of the families, they lost a baby at less than 6 months. Like, you walk through life moments with people, and so we were talking about those. But we talked about, there was something about Sunday night church, like coming together, having not having a time limit on Sunday, Sunday morning service, extended time of worship, prayer, a deeper message, and then just having space at the altar to just do business with God. And so that was the conversation. Now fast forward to, I'm flipping through Instagram. I see a picture from our VBS, and it's VBS, so it's all the fun activities and all the things they were doing. But Beth and I literally started crying on the deck of this the resort that we were staying at. It was an awesome picture of kids at the altar responding to God, and it's kids, so you've got kids looking at the ceiling and doing everything. But there are kids full on at the altar, pressing in and seeking, and right behind them are older adults, like 50-year-olds, 60-year-old adults, side by side with these kids doing ministry together. And we saw it. And the connection between multiple generations, multi-generational ministry, and this conversation about Sunday night. And we had the realization, we're doing our kids, our teenagers, our college students a disservice by not creating a space for them to learn how to linger in the presence of God. That really was the heartbeat. Good. How are we training up our kids to linger in the presence of God? Because there's something that happens, something special that happens when you set aside focused time to do that. So, I mean, really for us, First Wednesday is all about being a people of the Spirit, led by the Spirit, and then really renewed by the Spirit. And we knew that, Sunday night church, back in the mid 90s, it was every single Wednesday night, and just families and busyness and all those things. That's just not a sustainable ministry pace. So seeing these First Wednesdays, what if we did once a month, Wednesday night? So our kids, we don't do kids ministry. Actually, for everybody age grades 3 and up, we're all in service together. So that's what our youth group. It's not like an off night for youth group. That is youth group for that night. It's not an off night for our kids ministry. That is kids ministry for that night. And we've had some really great conversations. Part of that, part of the conversations we've had is, what does it mean to be a people of the Spirit, being led by the Spirit versus being led by the spirit of the world, kind of a compare and contrast. We've had conversations around, hey, we need to actually step up and do spiritual battle. How are we fighting for Generation Z? How are we fighting, already in the trenches for Generation Alpha, our youngest kids in the room? So I think it's been a game changer for our church. It's creating a space outside of those regular rhythms for people to take that intentional step of pressing in and reteaching, relearning how to be in the presence of God.
Yeah, Pastor Jim, I love that because it feels like we need to be reminded to go back to the basics. And if we don't
Mhm.
know the basics and we're expecting people to function at these higher levels of intimacy with the Lord or understanding the prophetic or the gifts of the Spirit or the fruit of the Spirit,
Right.
like if we don't create those space and opportunities, then we are doing somebody a disservice.
Yeah.
And I think of it kind of when we were on staff at church, they did something called J term. So the month of January, they would take those Wednesday nights, right,
Mhm.
for 4 weeks, and they would hit on those mainstream
Mm,
topics of whatever it
I
is.
love that.
And I feel like that's what you guys are doing in a different way by taking that first Wednesday of leaning into those things that you're unpacking with those third graders and all the way up to 100, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And just really create an opportunity for them to understand the goodness of God, the heart of worship, hearing the voice of God in the midst of a
Mhm.
crazy, chaotic world and week. It causes us to slow down, causes us to catch our breath, and hopefully recalibrate on so many levels. Because when you create space for the Holy Spirit, you better get ready for Him to move, because He will when we slow down enough to even hear. And I'm just reminded, like, that's why we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Like, that's just a joke. Like, oh, we have two
Right.
ears because we should listen twice as much as we talk, right? And Pastor Jim, I just love your heart because you've already kind of alluded to the fact that you have 2 young adults and of your own that are your
Mhm.
children, and they're going to school, one of them, and the other one's taking a gap year, asking all the adulting questions. Who do I want to
Right.
be? Who am I? Who am I becoming? Where do I go? What does this
Mhm.
world have to offer me? And how do I live a life dedicated to the Lord in the midst of, wild and crazy? And when we feel like our life stops as individuals, when we're wrestling through those seasons, the world doesn't stop around us, right? And it's like we
Right.
can't even catch our breath. So I would just be curious, Pastor Jim, like as a lead pastor of a church, um, why um, why do you believe in the next generation of young adults? Like, why is that
Mm.
vital? And maybe you could even say that as a parent now, because we talk to many people that maybe don't understand the importance of young adult ministry because they don't have young adults yet. And they get a young adult in their house, they're like, oh my gosh, we need to create something for them when something should have been potentially in place the entire time. So talk about that young adults for us for a second.
Yeah, when I think about young adults, and it's such a mindset shift when all of a sudden, oh, they're not my kids anymore. These are adults. That all of a sudden has a, oh boy, I wasn't prepared for that moment. Um, but for church ministry, one of the things that stands out for me, why do we believe in young adults? I don't think I've seen a more passionate, driven, um, like there's this sense of self-motivation. These young adults, they want to do something, they want to accomplish, and they not just succeed. Especially for young adults who are following Jesus and want to walk out His ways and really make a difference, change their world one person at a time. Like, they are so fired up about it. And so for me, I get excited as a pastor. Like, I said this to someone the other day. I realized, for me in my life, the sunset is closer than the sunrise that's behind
Right.
me. Like,
Wow.
and so if the church is going to continue, we know we have to empower, we have to equip, and we have to allow space for these driven kids. I think what happens is that we don't understand. I'm a Gen Xer, and so I have this Gen X angst, this deep rooted, that sometimes dysfunctional cynicism that sometimes comes out. But when I see these young adults meeting college students, or I'm meeting young married couples, our church is really thriving right now in the 18 to 35. Like, something is clicking for them when they're finding community, they're finding
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
here. Now, my role is not to be the primary person. Now my role is, I'm trying to learn how am I calling them up? How am I calling them into service? How am I calling them into their God-given talents, their God-given, their spiritual giftings, not just their abilities that they've developed over time. And so, leveraging their passions and pointing them in a direction, like, okay, here's the mission. Here's what we're trying to do. Here's who you can really be in Jesus. and turning them loose and almost getting out of their way. It's a fascinating time. And I think that's where a lot of churches and a lot of pastors that I talk with, they have that tension of how are we doing that? How are we actually doing that? How are we actually equipping, serving? How are we leading well? So it's a really fascinating time, but it's amazing. Like the energy that young adults bring to a church family, it's cyclical. The more and more young adults that it's almost like Jim Collins, Good to Great. He talked about the flywheel principle. You get a couple clicks on that flywheel and things start moving. Older generations, my generation and beyond, when they see an infusion of life and health and vitality that young adults bring, they want to be a part of that. And then they add their energy. It's a really amazing thing.
I'm reminded of course, the flywheel like you're talking about, but I'm just thinking of college football or the energy you talk about that. Like, I just think that the wave always starts in the student section, that sometimes at a basketball or football game, young people don't even sit down. Like they literally have this stamina, this incredible amount of energy. And when it is channeled and focused towards God's glory, the eternal things that matter most. And I love the emphasis too, that your heart as a pastor beats intergenerationally. And you're already thinking about the cusp of the arrival of the alpha generation, which is like our daughters or babies, toddlers, infants right now. And I think that my question is always right now, like, what if the next Jesus revolution began with Generation Z? There was like great awakenings throughout American history, and even most recently, like kind of that hippie generation. That was like the Jesus revolution, and Greg Laurie talks about it. And I'm just like, man, God used an unlikely generation before. And I'm excited about the possibilities. Like, what if that next Jesus revolution came with Gen Z, came with the alpha generation, and just for such a time as this? And I know that for some pastors, their next step is going to be to identify a leader and to launch a full-blown young adult ministry, whatever that might mean, a small group or services or gatherings or events. But I'm just thinking of like, for the pastor who's like, okay, I don't know if that's our step, but we've got to take a step. What are some ways that pastors, churches, boards, staff, teams can create discipleship on-ramps or opportunities for the next generation of that 18 to 30-year-old window that so often is overstudied and overlooked? What could some next steps be?
No, that's a great question. I think for us, it was an intentional decision to say, this is their church too. I think a lot of times what can happen, and maybe it's a result of, youth group ministry, seeing teenagers, they have their space, they have their service. It's kind of a separate thing. For us as a church, we made a decision really, really early on, and it's part of it is a church growth dynamic class. So maybe just let me talk practically for a minute. There's some natural growth points that can happen for a church. A room starts getting full. We're going to have our kids, the younger kids, elementary age kids, they're just going to be in their own service the entire time. Well, now you've created, in a church of our size, our average Sunday morning attendance is 250, 275 people. So now you're sending out 40 kids. You just created 40 seats for other people. We decided early on that actually we want to be in the room with our kids. So we dismiss our kids after worship. It's actually a value for us that we worship together. But something happens with youth group aged kids, the high school aged kids. They kind of have their church and it's separate. So I think that especially college kids can get lost in this in-between space. It's kind of a land between. They're between two different worlds, trying to figure out who they are. So if a church can make the intentional decision, it's their church too. I actually say that all of the time when I'm talking about, when I'm calling people into, not just serving, but stepping into their calling, stepping into their ministry, stepping into their purpose. It's their church too. Like we need to be there for these these kids. So it's a really fascinating thing. So realize that they're the church right now. They're not a church someday. They're the church right now, and they're part of our mission field. I think a huge thing, especially for those who would be called into some kind of ministry role, whether it's a leadership role. Maybe we're talking about a college age student who's a pastor, someone who's an up and coming pastor. Regardless, I think one of the things that we can provide as churches is a place for them to fail. And one of the things what I mean by that is, if we expect kids to come out and succeed right off the bat, then we're already coming from this at a wrong angle. They need opportunities to fail because they have to learn. And so I remember going back to my early college days. One of the first opportunities I had when my first preaching opportunity. It was a Sunday night service. So it'd be like if I was preaching at a First Wednesday here at Real Life Now. I made a really off-color joke right at the very beginning of my message. And it went over like a lead balloon. And it took me about a half an hour to get everybody back. Pastor pulled me aside afterwards and said, "Jim, your message was great. It was one of the best messages on what I preached." Actually, when Moses comes down from the mountain and there's Aaron and the golden calf idol right there. He said, "But you never got anybody to that response moment because you lost everybody at the off-colored joke." And he did it in a way that was really affirming. Like he complimented, he built up, the content was really good, and then he brought the correction. And I think we need to create opportunities for people to have a safe environment to fail.
Right.
It's a big deal. We're not going to learn from success. We only learn when we make mistakes or when we fail. And so sometimes there can be this tension of, you got to get it right. If you don't get it right, I can't have you serve. Andy Stanley's got a leadership paradigm. If somebody can do something 80% as good as you, train them the other 20%. Craig Rochelle, it goes crazy far. He says, if someone can do something half as well as you, train them up the other 50%. And so there's this tension of allowing trust. Like we have to give trust away and allow people to fail and build them up. So I think there's that. Right. I think a big one, especially with social media and the projected personas that everybody is trying to put out there. They're ultra curating what people see. If we can be leaders who lead in authenticity, and that we don't put on a persona, we don't put on a mask. If we can let young adults in and see, here's some of the things that I maybe because we're not we're not super close, we're not going deep into struggles and those kinds of things, but just leading it. I wrestle with some of those same things. I think authenticity and trust is a huge thing. And I think, it can easily get lost. I was reminded of this when we were talking a while back, that we have to make room for the next generation. I think we can easily forget that we're standing on the shoulders of those that went before us. Mm-hmm. And this next generation, they need to stand on our shoulders for the church to continue. Pastor friend down in Arkansas, Rod Lloyd, there's a sign in his church building and say, may future generations say we stewarded this well. Like we're temporary stewards of the church, of the organization, of the mission. And so if we can be comfortable and confident in our calling, then we can raise up other leaders. And what a joy it'll be someday when we have somebody who's standing on our shoulders, taking the church or taking a mission or taking a ministry farther than we could have taken it. So I think those are some practical things right off the get-go that pastors and leaders can adopt.
I agree, and I love it so much. And we've talked about some things like Sunday night service, and we talked about First Wednesdays. And I think that part of the dynamic at play across our culture is just this idea of like the attractional model. And I know this is off script, but my brain starts wondering of like, with the removal of some of the deeper moments or some of those places, like, so I'm thinking of the development of young adults, the development of young leaders, leadership pipeline, those types of concepts. do you think the arrival of the attractional model has maybe at times without the intention, just like accidentally taken away some leadership development opportunities for the next generation?
Yeah, I would agree with that statement, and I'll agree in two different ways. Number one, so part of the story here at Real Life is, our church, we changed our church name. It was Roseville Assembly of God. We're an almost 70-year-old church now. And we changed our name from Roseville Assembly of God to Real Life Church in 2002. And part of that was the influence and impact of the seeker-sensitive attractional model from Willow Creek Church. And actually, if you come to our facility, the auditorium space that we meet in is a micro version of a macro room of Willow Creek Church. And one of the things that we did when we made that shift was, okay, if we're going attractional model, if we're trying to be, ultra relevant and creative and all these different things with our Sunday morning experience, especially as a Pentecostal church, there's some distinctives that we have with the gifts of the Spirit that sometimes are uncomfortable for people who are far from God or they're seeking. And so, conversations were happening about how are we, creating a space that is, the bottom line is we never created a space where the gifts of the Spirit were active, but it was always the intention. Hey, we're going to do Sunday night church or Wednesday night church where we're going to practice, we're going to work on the gifts of the Spirit as a church body. We never did that. And so the unintentional consequence of that was, okay, Holy Spirit, we know what we're doing on Sunday mornings, but you can go and have a seat. And so there was a tension with that. And I think part of that attractional ministry is you have to perform at a certain level. There has to be a certain polish. There has to be a certain level of, production value, for lack of a better phrase, where, okay, as an 18-year-old kid, when I came back to church after wandering in high school, my first ministry role was I was the overhead slide guy. So, I'm sliding the transparency up and down for the worship team. And, I couldn't sing. But I was given a space to start practicing and growing. That's part of our heartbeat behind First Wednesday. So our last First Wednesdays, I get out the Bible to start reading scripture, and I just off the cuff, I'm like, no, I actually need to have a couple of our kids come up. So there was a 6th grader and a 5th grader that came up, and they read scripture for the church. We're going to use this space for First Wednesdays for youth group kids who are developing their musical abilities. So maybe, them being on stage or on platform on a Sunday morning, that might be too pressure filled. But a Sunday night where it's definitely much more relaxed, it's a family environment. Maybe that's an environment where adults can partner with teenagers or young adults, college students, and start practicing and growing and giving away those opportunities. Actually we had a summer intern, and it's not very often on a Sunday morning where I make space for college students to preach. It's part of that hour on Sunday. I don't get often, I only get 35 to 40 hours a week communicating with people on church, but I stepped aside to make room for this intern to share a message, and it was a home run. He came at it from a different angle than I would have, and it was absolutely spot on. And I'm so glad I did that. And now that college student is taking that experience, and now he's dissatisfied in his college because he knows he has a ministry calling, and so he's looking at transferring. So had I not stepped out of the way, did I unintentionally put a roadblock in front of that college student to step into their calling and their purpose? So yes, I do. Long answer, yes, I think that attractional model with wanting to have a certain kind of production value can be an unintentional limiting factor in how we're growing and developing younger people.
Yeah.
It's such a good way to say it, or to come at it. Mine was unpolished because it was just off the cuff. My mind started thinking about this, because here is this generation that's like, put me in, coach. Like, I want a piece of the pie. I want a piece of the action. I'm ready to play. I'm cause driven. And here the church is so cause driven as well. And we need to connect the two. And I get it. The nature of young adults, there's this transitory nature. And I know that there's production value and excellence and all of those things, but I'm just asking the listener to think about, like, where are we creating space? It might not be Sunday mornings, it might not be weekend gatherings, but where is the space and where are we making room for the next generation to belong, to grow, to develop? And discipleship's a part of that, but ministry opportunities and outlets are a part of that too.
Yeah. And I think one important thing that Pastor Jim already kind of hit on is we're standing on the shoulders of somebody else who's gone before us. And we may not know the sacrifices that were placed, the prayers that were prayed, the pioneering that took place, and all those different things you kind of have to begin to think about as a leader. As you get older, these are more wise thoughts, I hope. But then the next question is, who are you putting on your shoulders who can go further, faster, and see farther than you ever could? And I just think that is such a burden of mine and Josiah's, of who do we believe in? And we don't want to make decisions for people when it comes to like who's worthy and who's not worthy. It's, we're all called, but who's actively seeking it out, and who can we spur on in those seasons when we can come around or alongside them or create spaces for them. And Pastor Jim, I'd be curious to just kind of lean into this one. We talked to a lot of Gen Xers, I would say specifically, who have a hard time maybe always connecting the dots with the generations. They understand the generations that have gone before, but maybe once we hit the millennials, it just gets a little murky the further on it goes down. So for the lead pastor, whether they're a Gen Xer or not, how would you encourage them to set their fears aside when it comes to the potential siloing of a young adult ministry? Because many of them say, well, I would start a young adult ministry, but they're just going to silo themselves and start running rogue, essentially. But how do you, as a pastor and as a leader, what insight do you have for somebody who's kind of on that line of like, I see it, but I don't know if I believe it yet? And how can you speak to that fear of starting a young adult ministry essentially and not be siloed as young adults?
That's a great question, Micah. I think, for me, any ministry, so whether it's young adult ministry or creative arts, worship team, men, women, teenagers, kids, benevolence, whatever ministry it might be, the starting point is not necessarily even, what's the result we're looking for. I think for me, one of the starting points is, as pastors, we know our role isn't to do the work of the ministry. It's to call up other people, to train, to build and equip. And so by definition, the body of Christ, made up of many different parts, one person can't do all of those things. And so for lead pastors, I think there has to be some point, a confidence, a comfortability of allowing other people to win. I had someone come to me after, I think it was after almost 1 year. I think I was in the chair of lead pastor for a year. It was a Christmas, and we had a guest speaker come in for a women's event, and she was asking, what's your favorite thing about being a lead pastor? Is it the parking space? Is it the preaching every week? What might it be? And part of it was funny, but part of it, she was actually asking, like, what's your favorite thing? And I always have two answers to that. Number one, as a pastor, we get invited into the highs and lows of life. Like, we get to do weddings and baby dedications, and people want to share their news with us. But then as pastors, we get invited into like the most tender of moments. We get invited, we're the ones that get invited to pray at hospitals. We get invited to do funeral ministry. So we hold this really special place in people's lives. As leaders of other pastors, leaders of young adults, of older adults, we get to equip, like, we get to get out of the way. So the other answer I have for that question is, I love setting up other people to win. I don't, if I'm the ceiling, if I'm the cap, if I'm as good as the organization is ever going to get, well, we've already hit our potential. We're not gonna thrive any further than where I'm thriving. We're not gonna reach anybody that I'm not reaching. So I look for people. I look for young adults. I look for college students. I look for people in our church that are equipped, that are in process, that are called to do things, who are better than me. I built my team around people who are like, I was a youth pastor for like a year and a half, and I was a terrible youth pastor. I did not do a good job of it. I don't know what it was. I was only 21 at the time. Like it should have worked. It didn't. But the youth pastor that we brought in is an amazing youth pastor. She is so much better than me than I ever could be in reaching teenagers. So my role is to equip and to train and then to get out of their way. Like my role is to point at the mission and then get out of the way. Our connections pastor, our worship pastor, our kids pastor, our teaching and care pastor, who's a boomer. He just turned 74. How am I equipping them and then getting out of their way? So there has to be a confidence. There has to be a level of comfort in allowing other people to do what they're called to do. Because as lead pastors, we're not called to do all of the things. But the silo piece of that is really interesting. I think you have to reach in and find ways to involve. I think whether it's if it's a lay leader, just someone from the church who's leading a young adult ministry, or a pastor who says, this is kind of an unreached, it's almost like it's an unreached people group for some churches, right? There has to be an intentionality behind that. And so there's some subtle ways that you can help break down those silos. When I'm preaching on Sundays, when I'm trying to like think through examples of like, when you go to work tomorrow, well, that's only reaching a certain number of people in the room with whatever example it might be. So I'm always trying to think through like, how can I come up with 4 or 5 different lines like that to help kind of tear that silo down and bring everybody into the moment. So, whether you're at work tomorrow or you head back to class, or, you're with your kids when, whatever that might be, I try to find language like that, to pull everybody in together. So I think the comfort, the confidence, this is their church too, like adopting some language where you're intentionally, you're just not going to allow a silo mentality to happen. And as a pastor, how great is it to have a thriving subculture in your church? Because what's going to happen, and Josiah, I really appreciated what you said about younger generations kind of being the start of a renewal. We actually kind of hold that dear at our church. Like, Lord, we want this to start with our kids. We had a Sunday morning where all of a sudden there was a spontaneous altar response. It was elementary age kids that were like coming down, and then here come their parents right behind them to pray together. And then all of a sudden here comes some college students. Like, it's all there, it's all happening. And so now my role is, okay, how do I just shepherd this moment and keep this moving and building off this natural thing that God is already doing? So I think it's a really important decision to say, this is their church, and how am I serving them? Not just how am I, controlling that or making sure this is going the way that I want it.
That's so good.
Jim, is so good. And one of the things that spoke to me most, and I've heard both of these quotes, I've heard Andy Stanley say that, of like, hey, if you can find somebody who's 80% of the way as good as you are, just hand it off. And I've heard Craig say that too. If somebody can do it as half as good as you, offboard the thing, empower, give away. And what I'm realizing in this moment is there's some great strengths that I have in leadership, in ministry, and I'm passionate about starting new projects, launching initiatives, very entrepreneurially wired that way, very driven and motivated, and I can execute and team build and cast vision. But I think my personal takeaway from this conversation, I think it's easy when somebody's better than I am of just go, like slam dunk. But when somebody's not as seasoned or mature, I'm already realizing that I think that's an area for growth for me of how am I cultivating opportunities in our ministry, in leadership, where somebody can develop. And it's okay, like you said, for them to fail or for them to grow or develop a new muscle. Like, is my expectation too much polish or production or performance versus looking at it as a true opportunity to invest in somebody to grow? But that's really speaking to me today, like off the charts of just some awareness that's come about, or some conviction of like, whoa, I can think of a couple areas where I'm like, I might be robbing some people of an opportunity or a blessing, or just ministry by holding on to too many. And then I'm the same person complaining, like, there's too much on my plate.
Right.
There's the problem.
Right. I think there's a really fascinating dynamic that happens, and I forget who wrote this. If it's either the title of the book or it's a chapter or heading, but people get promoted to the level of their incompetence, right? Like they get to a certain spot where they get promoted or they get elevated, and all of a sudden they're not as high of a performer as they were because now they're outside of their comfort zone. And so it's different in a church than something like that. But as we're seeing giftings and as we're seeing the calling, as we're seeing spiritual giftedness, there's something mystical, if I can use that word. There's a supernatural piece of this of, I'm not a musician by training. I've never taken any voice lessons or piano lessons or anything. I played middle school band. I played clarinet. That's I couldn't read a piece of sheet music to save my life. How $980 million or whatever the Powerball is, read a piece of music, I'm out. I can't do it. But I was a worship leader for 20 years. And it was a supernatural gifting, where I could lead a team, where I could help create a moment where people were experiencing the presence of God. And actually, shortly before I was asked to serve as lead pastor, I could feel that calling change. I actually verbalized to somebody once, like, I feel like my time as a musical worship leader was coming to an end. And it was part of preparing for this season that I'm in. And so actually it was 1 month. It was August of 2016. I started as lead pastor in January of 2017. I took that entire month to train up the other worship leaders that were on our team. Like, I needed to be ready to step away and not do this anymore. And so, volunteers, and it was all like the details. How are you scheduling volunteers? How are you creating worship sets? What are you looking for? How are you helping lead a band? It was taking some of those really practical things that always just live up here and getting them out, and then seeing those things like, I see this in you.
Right.
You can do this. You have the ability to lead people. See how people follow you? See how people are drawn to you? And so as we can call those things out in other people, there was someone who was serving in our church a while back, and they were super passionate about kids. And yet they always had this look on their face of never being happy, and they were almost unapproachable. I'm like, you say you love kids all the time. Let your face show it. And they changed this, and the kids are just always around them. Kids are swarming them with just one little thing. So I think as pastors, if we can see those things and we can call those things out in people, as we can, help elevate and lift up, especially college students, I see this in you. Like, I see this in you. You can do this. You're meant to do this. You're made to do this. I think that'll spark something in them. I think it's already there.
Yeah.
I think most of the times when we say those things, it should be like a confirming word. We're not pulling something out from left field for people.
Right.
I think God would be already working in people. So what we're speaking, the life that we're speaking over them, it's confirming, like, yes, okay, somebody else sees what I'm feeling. I think that would be really encouraging.
That's so good. We were just talking to a friend yesterday, and he was talking about the exact same thing. When God's calling you to do something, the calling's being pulled out of you, something happens inward first, like the Holy Spirit speaking to you. You feel something stirring. You feel your spiritual gifts being utilized, or God's asking you to use them differently. And then there's an outside confirmation. So there's an internal, and then there's the external. And we as leaders hopefully are speaking life and truth, and just calling out greatness in everybody. And one of our friends, Trey, he says, growth can't happen outside of our comfort zone or in our comfort zone, right? So growth happens outside of our comfort zone. And I think to be leaders that are being willing to stretch and to admit that we don't have it all together, we don't have and know all of the answers, but we do serve a God that we can, go to him with all these different things when it comes to leading, when it comes to prayer. And I've realized that when God moves in our lives or calls us to the next, I don't want to say level, because that's not even the right term. When you feel the next season coming that seems larger than you, it causes me personally to tap into God even more so than I was in the last season, or that transition in between. What in reality, I should be always drawing from him and praying to him just as intensely, as intentionally throughout my whole entire life, right? So I think when we realize when we cap out on our own potential, we have to tap into the supernatural. And that's when God starts showing more and more. Like, Micah, if you just get out of the way, I would love to show you what I can do, right? So I just think that we have the power as leaders, and the ability and the calling of leaders is to speak life and create opportunities, and to ask people to grow, ask people to step up and hoist people up on our shoulders, and not settle for anything less when it comes to those things. We can't say yes for people. We can't say no for people, but they're just going to have to discover that on their own. And if we can be a voice of the external experience, or through word of God, or giving them an opportunity, I think that's just an awesome thing to do and be called to do as a leader. And Pastor Jim, we've come to our favorite part of the episode. Everything's good so far, but we really like to lean into this because this is like the intense 5 and 5. So we have 5 questions, 5 minutes on the clock. Are you ready for the challenge?
Let's do it. I'm up for it.
All right, Pastor Jim, question number 1. What is something you're into right now as a hobby, like outside of ministry? What do you like to do for fun?
Is there such a thing as life outside of ministry?
Well, yeah, you can't lose yourself.
We love to travel. And so this has been a very busy ministry year, so we haven't traveled as much. But my wife and I, our happy place, any place where there's sand and water. We try to get away and take in some vitamin D from that big old ball in the sky. And actually, I'm reading a lot more. That was something that kind of got rekindled during my sabbaticals. How am I filling all of this time? And so, I'm reading constantly. I'm, not just ministry books, but I'm back to reading. I'm reading a lot of biographies right now. So I'm, reading a biography on, Mel Brooks, the comedian. I'm reading a biography on John Adams. Like, I'm in the middle of a few different biographies. So that's been taking up a lot of hobby time lately.
That's so fun. I'm drawn to biographies too. I mean, here's these remarkable life stories, and so much can be learned through history, but documentation of people's lives. And we know you're an avid baseball fan. So will you share your favorite sports team?
Well, my happy place is that building right here. This is Dodger Stadium. For the listeners, you can't see me pointing at my picture of Dodger Stadium on the wall. I am a Dodgers fan. Los Angeles Dodgers is my favorite team. 1988, Kirk Gibson's home run sealed the deal. Lifelong Dodgers fan because of one moment. So yeah, LA Dodgers all the way.
That's amazing.
So cool. Okay, question 2.5. Who are you rooting for in the World Series currently?
See, I just want this to be a good series. These have been great games. I'm not a fan of the Astros because of what they did to the Dodgers with the cheating scandal, but I love Dusty Baker. I want Dusty Baker to win a World Series, but I am cheering for the Phillies.
Same.
5 home runs in 1 inning. That was huge.
It's electric. Okay, question 2.75.
Oh, man, he's cheating.
Let's go.
What do you think of the Vikings this year?
They are the luckiest team I have seen in a really long time. I am thrilled that they're 6-1. I'm thrilled with the trade that they just pulled off yesterday for that tight end. But they are getting so lucky. So I hope it continues. Let their luck continue. Skol.
I think they want their fans to know that they are the nail-biting experiences within the last 2 minutes of every game. That's where I'm like,
I saw a statistic yesterday. It blew my mind. Kirk Cousins has I think it was 37 game streak of throwing a touchdown pass, and there's no other quarterback that is above 17 games consecutive. So it's kind of crazy. So we'll see. There's a lot of football yet to be played.
That's true. We'll see. Well, here's a curveball. Speaking of baseball earlier, if you could ask Josiah and myself one question, what would you ask us today? Anything under the sun.
Anything under the sun.
Or above.
What's your dream for this for young adults today? Like at the end, when the sun sets on this season in ministry, like what do you want your legacy? You get remembered for what you did at Young Adults today. What do you want that to be?
You want to go first?
Sure. I mean, Pastor Jim, what got me moving into ministry specifically was the call of God. And then he gave me a vision of it appeared to be at least 10,000 young adults on their knees, lifting their hands in worship, surrendering their lives to Christ. And so that dream, that vision, and I think the other thing of I would love to see the biblical worldview statistic reversed, where 96% of Gen Z is lacking the biblical worldview. I would love to help support and just point people to the word of God. And I think if there was another thing, it would just be helping young adults find their place in the local church. And so helping this overlooked, overstudied, underserved generation just be championed, be included. And I think that'd be it for me.
Yeah, I think what led us to the decision of becoming a 501c3 nonprofit for young adults today was just the realization of the question that was asked. What is our biggest kingdom contribution? Is where we were prior to this all that we have to offer God? And if so, what does it look like? If not, what does that look like? And so I guess my biggest prayer for the next generation and what I want to be said, not of us, but it's like, I want to see people in heaven radically changed for the love of Jesus. So I want people to know when they get to heaven, who is Jesus, not what did I know about him on earth and I got my get out of hell free card. No, I want to know the heart of Christ. So going back to the word of God. So I wrote these down, the heart of Christ. I want to see their purpose. I want them to be equipped to understand the ways of the world versus in the heavenly realms. What does that mean? What does that look like? How do I discern the voice of God? What is of the enemy? What's my own thought? Helping them pray for three things that I pray for myself and the generation. I pray for wisdom, I pray for knowledge, and I pray for discernment. And with all those things comes a natural hunger and a longing for the heart of Christ. And on top of that, I work with so many young adults, and I think this is out of my own brokenness. I think this was where God stirred my heart for young adult ministry. Is there's no place for young adults to do life with each other that are outside of the bar or the club. At least when I was in my setting in my early 20s, that's what my experience was not plugged into a church right away, believed in God, but didn't have it. And coming out of that is I want to see good and godly marriages built and centered on Christ to succeed, so they can go further, farther, faster, together, and not have the confusion along the way of did I make the right choice or did I settle along the way, but help them sift through all the chaos and let it be said of us that we did what we're called to do, and may it be multiplied and fruitful beyond our years and essentially outlive us, I guess.
I love it.
So,
love it.
Long answer, but
speaking a lot of life right there. Let it be so.
Wow. So back to you. You mentioned you like to travel. If you could go one place next, where would you go?
That you haven't been.
That we haven't been. Okay, so it's a bucket list. Have you seen? So it's Fiji. Have you seen those like bungalows that are built out right over the water? That's the dream vacation where you're right there out on the water. We've priced those out, and we're going to need some subsidies in order to make that happen. That is not a cheap vacation, but that's on the list. Like that's a huge bucket list thing for us, is getting out to a place like Fiji or something like that for that.
I love it. We can't agree more for the sunshine and sand. That's what we're drawn to as well. But here's the fifth and final question, Pastor Jim. If you could leave the listener with one word of encouragement today, what would you leave them with?
Oh man, number one, you're amazing, and you are called, you are being developed, you have a purpose for life, to build up and change the world, to be a part of the kingdom of God, to be a part of the body of Christ, to serve. So discover what your God-given talents and spiritual giftings are. There's no one like you in the body of Christ, and the body of Christ needs you, whether you're 18 years old, you're 35 years old, 75 years or beyond. Like there's no one else like you. So you're specifically called to that, especially for that 18-year-old or somewhere in that young adult range. resist the temptation to shortcut the development process. We have that tendency to want to put on a mask. And I think what happens when we do that, when we project a persona of what we think we want other people, we wind up just performing, and people aren't seeing the authentic us. So I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to draw people in with this projected image, but we're actually pushing people farther away. There's something profoundly supernatural about the discipleship and development process. And so don't try to shortcut to get to success. Don't shortcut to get to an arrival place. You got to learn to love the discipleship journey. And then the last thing I'd say is you need to find, I'm all for having a group of peers who are speaking into your life, but you need a mentor. You need someone who is ahead of you in the journey to call things out in you, who has experienced life, and like build that David and Jonathan kind of relationship with someone in your peer group, but find someone who's ahead of you in the journey to help develop and hone you. And it's a humble ask. Like, will you be my mentor? It's a big ask, but be brave. There's someone out there who wants to mentor you and wants to walk side by side with you.
So good. So good.
It's incredible. I love that encouragement personally, and for this community of the Young Adults Today podcast. And Pastor Jim, what makes me happy right now is we got to hang out with you, and people got to hear your heartbeat for the local church,
Amen.
The DNA, your belief and passion in the next generation, and just your encouragement. So thanks so much.
Love it. Thanks for having me. What an honor. I love you guys. Love that we get to spend time together like this.